What is up, YouTube? This is your host, Ranee B, here to spill that homicidal tea. In today's case, we're covering the case of Lucie Blackman. You ever heard of that one before? Yeah, me neither. It's going to take us all the way over to Tokyo, Japan, and one might wonder, what kind of tea do they spill over there, those parts? Well, in this case, it's an extra strong blend of bullshit. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's just say that this case is very frustrating, yet intriguing. Before we get into it, let me remind you to smash that subscribe button, just like Justice should have smashed Joji Boy, in this case, the case of Lucie Blackman. On Saturday, July 1st, 2000, 21-year-old Lucie Blackman informed her roommate, Louise Phillips, that she had been scheduled to have a meeting with a man who wanted to gift her with a cell phone. She wore a basic black dress and black sandals when she left. Lucie didn't say who the man was, but Louise suspected that it was probably somebody that she met at the Tokyo Club where they both worked. Lucie was originally from Sevenoaks, Kent, England, but she and Louise relocated in May 2000 to travel across Asia. Lucie's parents, Tim Blackman and Jane Stair, I hope I'm saying that right, though divorced, still co-parented well and agreed that Lucie, the oldest of 3 children, needed a few months to clear her thoughts and figure out what she wanted to do with her life and her career. Lucie and Louise had decided to spend their summer in Tokyo and had secured positions at a hostess club named Casablanca Club in Tokyo's Roppongi neighborhood. I hope I'm saying that right too. They both worked as flight attendants for British Airways when they lived in England, so the hostess role, it really appealed to them because it involved making people feel welcome and required the hostesses to have good conversational skills, which also was a skill required for working in the aviation industry. Lucie, she was a natural at the club. Her coworkers, they adored her since she was always so bouncy and cheerful. She had a terrific sense of humor. She was popular with the clients' clubs and customers as well, since she was easy to talk to and actually quite pretty. Now, at this point, you might be wondering what a hostess club is. This is something that we don't see much of in Western culture. I am familiar with host clubs as they fascinate me. I watched a movie called The Great Happiness Space, Tale of an Osaka Love Thief. It's a great movie. It's got subtitles though, so hopefully you can deal with that. But if you can, watch it. It's amazing. Like if you're from America or England or Germany or something, it is completely a whole different world. I will link to the YouTube location in the description. I'll try to do one of those card thingies as well. But after seeing that and other host documentaries, I just don't get them. Unless I'm just super naive and can't get the fact that there's a money for sex transaction that I refuse to believe exists. In Japan, though, these bars that offer attractive men and women that are paid an exorbitant amount of money just to sit with customers and flirt and drink and that's it? Well, yeah, I would love that job. They're pretty popular in Japan. In the hostess bars, girls welcome the guys to the club who are mostly affluent businessmen. They sit alongside them, refill their drinks, light their cigarettes, and spend the night conversing with them. Primarily responsible just for creating a fantasy for these men and generating revenue for the club's owners in the form of higher alcohol tabs. Well, despite the fact that these are rather intimate settings, many of these clubs that I've seen online prohibit hostesses from having any sort of sexual interaction with the customers. The notion is that everything's a fantasy, and that's what keeps the men coming back and spending more money. That's my opinion. However, while researching the story, I found a much more professional and articulate description of host clubs in a Time article that was actually covering Lucie Blackman's story. And what it said is that it's very loosely descended from a geisha house tradition. Hostess bars hire out women by the hour to act as companions for customers. Hostesses are not prostitutes. They are more like paid platonic girlfriends. Sign me up. Oh my gosh. They may choose to sleep with a client and they may choose not to. Although there are no official numbers on how many women work in these hostess bars, it's an estimated of hundreds of thousands of them and throughout Japan, and what is surely a multi-billion-dollar industry. And for salaryman customers, hostess bars and their posh atmosphere and beautiful women and steady flow of drinks are a choice venue in which they try to impress a client or close a business deal. Most hostess clubs employed Japanese and other Asian women, but in the beginning, around the 1980s, more and more began to stock Western women, whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. Talk about objectifying women. Of all hostesses in Japan, the highest paid tend to be pretty, English-speaking, Caucasian, blonde women. Lucie met every requirement. So there you go. Some hostess clubs are also encourage something called dohans, which are actually dates that take place outside the club. The hostesses greet them at like a high-end eat-only establishment. And then they retire to the club for drinks and a nightcap and karaoke and stuff. And that's where Lucie's roommate thought that she had gone. She thought that she had gone to meet one of these dohans from the Casablanca Club on July 1st, 2000. And the man, whose name Lucie kept private, had promised her a prepaid cell phone if she would accompany him to a beachside restaurant. Sign me up. When Lucie left, her roommate was still in bed in the 6 tatami matting room that they shared. Now, Louise had remembered that Lucie was wearing black dress, sandals, and a silver necklace with little hearts on it. They had arrangements to meet back up along with a man named Scott Fraser later that evening. Lucie called Louise 3 times that day. First at 1:30, said she'd met her date. 5 o'clock, I'm being taken out to the sea. And third time at 7 o'clock to say, I'll be back in about a half an hour. She also called Scott with the same messages a few minutes later. That was the last time anybody had ever heard from her. Now, Scott, if you're wondering, was a young Marine who was stationed on the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk. Lucie had started dating him in the weeks prior to this time, and it was a man whom she was actually dating, not Dohan dating or anything like that. They were actually going pretty slowly, but they got along really well. They clicked, so that's just the side note. Well, Louise Phillips received a call on her cell phone the next day from a man identifying himself as Akira Takagi, and he spoke with a heavy accent. He said, Lucie has chosen to become a member of a newly formed cult. She is safe and undergoing instruction in a hut in Chiba. What? Okay. Louise knew that something was very wrong. She attempted to find Lucie on her own, but there was actually no trace of her whatsoever. So that by July 3rd, that Monday, she still hadn't heard from her. She contacted her mom in the UK and informed her that Lucie had gone missing. Tim, Lucie's father, and Sophie, Lucie's sister, traveled to Tokyo to look for her because Tokyo is one of the entire world's most densely populated cities in the world. Her family understood that they needed all the support they could get, and they sought the assistance of Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who actually helped them. And he traveled to Japan. He was going there anyway for a G8 summit, so he'd also helped them with publicizing the case and doing everything humanly possible to locate Lucie. The case received a lot of media attention as a result of this. Tim Blackman and Lucie's sister Sophie both recalled not sleeping for those first days in Tokyo and being quite bewildered at the maze-like railway stations. She and her father made and distributed 30,000 posters with Lucie's photo on them in the first 2 weeks of their search. Sophie and her father asked anyone who could have been acquainted with her if they had any news or if they'd seen Lucie. A news conference was conducted, and the family stated they wanted to make it hard for anyone to claim that they weren't investigating Lucie's case properly. Here's a problem, though. Lucie was working illegally in Japan. Japan is totally different. Oh my gosh, I've gone down the wormhole of YouTube Japan videos, and oh my gosh, it's a different world. When it comes to judgments and how they view you, and that whole atmosphere and interpersonal ethic is completely different. And many people, if not most people, may have taken the attitude that since she was working illegally, she deserved it, whatever she got. Seems harsh, but Japan is a very traditional country, and their ideals are thousands of years old. Westerners cannot expect to just whimsically go there and expect to get different treatment than their own people. In fact, it's estimated that 300,000 illegal foreign workers in Japan, a third of them are mizu shobai, which is also known as water trade, and it's basically a generalized term for sex worker, including hostesses. The majority of English-speaking Caucasian women working in Roppongi's hostess clubs are unaware they're even mizu shobai members, in comparison to the tens of thousands of Asian women who work a storefront and cranking out sex acts for prices that are advertised on a friggin' menu board. Caucasian women are in a more privileged position there. It angers law enforcement and it gives them resentment. Caucasian hostesses in the mizu shobai are effectively paid the most for doing the least. Yet this doesn't protect them at all from the shame in Japanese culture. Most hostesses actually refuse to believe that, or they're in denial about the fact that they actually are considered a mizu because they aren't having sexual intercourse with their clients. However, the people from Japan regard that what they're doing is the sex industry, and sometimes women in this industry have been sexually assaulted or brutally even beaten. They try to get help from local police, and when they're asked, what are you even doing here? You know what you do for a living, and you know you're in violation of the law. What do you expect, to arrive here illegally in the work industry that you work in? You want help? And then they're turned away as a shameful part of Japanese culture. And the officials actually think that they deserve what they're getting. That's just the way it is there, period. Agree with it or not, it is what it is. Well, with that type of mentality, instead of pushing harder on the police and no new leads cropping up anywhere, the family hired a private investigator. It was discovered that the club where Lucie worked did not provide the same level of security as many other comparable clubs, and they would not aid Lucie's family at all. They didn't know if it was a customer or not because Lucie didn't inform Louise who she was seeing that day. A few days after Lucie went missing, one of the hostesses in the club actually approached the private investigator and said that she saw a man in the club interacting with Lucie on more than one occasion. She described what the man looked like, and the private investigator recorded that information. Another lead came about when people started seeing a woman matching Lucie's description with a man that matched the description of the man the co-worker told the private investigator about. The location that it's in them at was the nearest seaside, about 30 miles outside of Tokyo, according to the police reports. As a result, more media attention began to grow, and leads began to flow in through a hotline that was set up by the Blackmans in Tokyo. 3 international hostess workers came forward with stories that were extremely similar. Within the last several years, they'd all worked at the Roppongi hostess clubs and gone on a dohan to a beach restaurant with a wealthy, well-dressed Japanese businessman. Each of these ladies claimed that they had blacked out in the man's apartment and awoke hours or days later. With each girl, he used a different name. Kazu, Yuji. In September of 2000, even more victims started coming forward, some identifying a man by the name of Joji Obara as a sexually deviant perpetrator. The case was definitely starting to heat up, with the Tokyo Metropolitan Police assigning more officers to this case than it had assigned to the 1995 sarin gas attack in the city subway system that killed 12 and injured 5,500 people. They began closing in on one suspect, and that was in October 12th of 2000. 48-year-old Japanese businessman named Joji Obara was detained in connection with Lucie's disappearance, among other sexually motivated crimes. Police descended on the ragged decadence of Joji Obara's post-real estate bubble Donin Chofu, I hope so, I'm Japanese, estate. Behind the gated road of the futuristic 1960s architecture rose surveillance cameras peeking up from the bushes. Kind of weird. It was valued at more than $25 million at the peak of the Japanese real estate bubble. However, when the company went bankrupt, though, in the early 90s, liens were filed against the property, yet Obara continued to visit the home until his eventual incarceration. However, he had allowed it to deteriorate to the point where it looked like a physical portrayal of Japanese national mentality in regard to the real estate collapse, with rust peeling off the ironwork and bricks disintegrating off the wall. A Maserati, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, and Aston Martin from the early 60s, they were all there in varying states of disrepair, and they're all parked in the yard with flat tires. A life-size statue of a German Shepherd was glaring at everybody that entered the side door with porcelain teeth and creepy lifelike pink tongue. Okay, that's not the weird part. Police found an actual German Shepherd frozen rock solid in a huge freezer, along with a bouquet of flowers and dog food. Obara subsequently explained that he saved all that in hopes of one day being able to reanimate his loving pet into a clone dog. Now, this is more common than you actually know. There's a really good episode on South Korea and their elite, and a guy cloned his Labradoodle. And if I remember correctly, he had cloned the dog, but there was 2 embryos, so he had both of them made. I guess they're not born. I don't know, whatever. Well, there were 2 dogs, but he went on to be horrifically disappointed because the animals looked the same as his lovely departed best friend, but had totally different personalities. What do you expect? Okay, anyway. But it was crazy interesting. I highly recommend the video. And I'll add a link again, top somewhere, and in the description to that as well, because it's really an interesting clip. But anyway, back to the case. But it gets weirder, if you can imagine. Police uncovered hundreds of videotapes of presumably unconscious women being sexually assaulted by Obara in horrific ways that YouTube won't let me tell you about. Who, according to the police, Obara the whole time wore nothing but a Zorro mask. Like, where's Kevin Hart when you need him, looking like somebody said something crazy? Because I feel like I just did. Oh, there he is. But that's not all. Oh my gosh. Searching other properties he owned, police found blonde hairs that matched Lucie's in Obama's seaside condominium. Then a roll of film that contained pictures of her taken near the same area. But without a body, they couldn't bring charges against him. Police watched Obara's videos and read his journals about other victims. And it was really strange that this monster was Joji Obara. I mean, he was an appearingly successful businessman who had previously studied law and politics before going to work at his parents' real estate company. And as a result, he amassed a fortune, millions of dollars, which he loved to flaunt and spending frivolously. He had yachts, Ferraris, luxury designer watches. And he seemed to prefer the Western women, frequenting several of the hostess clubs that had them on their staff. When Joji was arrested, several additional women came forward to tell their stories about it. They claimed to have been sexually assaulted as well, and there were a lot of women, both Japanese and Western, and they all had the exact same story. They said that Joji would take them out, dinner, drinks, woo! And the following morning, when they woke up sick, Joji would feign innocence and say, "You drank a whole bottle of vodka. What a crazy night. You got so drunk. Do you remember anything? I don't remember anything." And he would pretend to ask them if they remembered what happened. And of course they didn't. The girls had a feeling, though, that Joji was lying and that he'd actually spiked their drinks with drugs or something and indecently assaulted them when they were unconscious. All of the women who did not know one another had the exact same story. It was later found out that one of the reasons that these women were so ill was due to chloroform toxicity. It's extremely damaging to the liver and can be fatal. Most of the women recalled waking up in bed or on the floor, vomiting, being unable to stand up or even crawl to the bathroom. Hardly any of them remembered anything about the previous night. Now, since Obara would sometimes dress them back in their own clothes after they regained consciousness, he would jokingly tell them, "You know, you drank so much, but you passed out. Nothing happened." In addition to these witnesses against Obara, police discovered a hospital receipt linking him to a former Roppongi hostess, an Australian named Carita Ridgway. In 1992, he took a on-the-brink-of-death Ridgway to Hiroshima Hospital, telling nurses that she'd eaten bad oysters. Ridgway was diagnosed with suffering from liver failure as a result of eating seafood tainted with the virus that causes hepatitis. After she died a few days later, Obara even comforted her parents when they came to take the body home. Now, due to an administrative fluke, Ridgway's liver had been preserved at Tokyo Women's Hospital, where the autopsy had originally been performed. After Obara came under investigation for Lucie's disappearance and these other assaults, medical examiners tested Ridgway's liver for chloroform. Boom! Proved to be present in toxic levels, allowing Obara to be charged in connection with that death. Police also found that on July 3rd, Obara purchased a chainsaw, cement mix, and other tools from a hardware store near the condo by the sea. Get this. On July 6, 2000, 5 days after Lucie Blackman went missing, police received a call from the management of a condominium on the Mura Peninsula, informing them that a tenant had been acting kind of weird and making a lot of noise in his condo the day before. When police arrived in the residence later, they saw a man, nude from the waist up, drenched in sweat, who identified himself as Joji Obara. He answered the door, and he had like a powdery liquid on his hands, kind of whitish. He told police officers that he was a real estate entrepreneur and he was renovating a property. Fair enough. He granted access to his flat, and after they requested permission to have a look around, in response to the noise complaint, he completely obliged. Cement chunks were seen throughout the entire flat and nearly all over the apartment and near the entryway. Officers also saw a large sack and what seemed to be a gardening hoe in one of the rooms. When they asked Obara about it, he said that he'd been removing tiles. "You've already seen enough," Obara snapped when the cops asked for access to the restroom. He became irate after more interrogation, and the cops, no probable cause, they departed. Now, it's important to note that the police in this area were completely unaware of Blackman's disappearance at this point in time, because there's no cause to suspect Obara for anything other than just being a bitchy house fixer-upper. Fast forward back to October of 2000. Despite the fact that Blackman's hair was discovered in Obara's residence, none of her blood was. Police seized receipts for the chainsaw, shovel, and an additional 5,000 video cassettes, 400 of which showed Obara abusing unconscious women for the past 20 years. And I mean, I know you guys are thinking, well, they have the hair. Well, this is 2000. Mitochondrial DNA from hair wasn't a thing yet. I wonder if they could go back and do something about it now, but who knows. Anyway, Carita Ridgway, a 21-year-old Western Australian woman, was one of those 100 or more Western ladies identified on those videos. And remember, she was the one that he took in 1992 to the hospital after being checked in by a man authorities found to be Joji Obara. The receipt for the hospital admission was discovered at his Zoshi residence, according to police. They also discovered a remark in Obara's journal that said, "Drug women. It makes them fall asleep completely." Why do you have to write that down? It's not even that long of a sentence. Anyway, Obara still refused to admit any guilt. But on January 10th, 2001, human remains were discovered buried in a small grave beneath a bathtub in a beach cave in Mura, Kanagawa, some 30 miles from Tokyo. The body was separated into 8 parts, and the head had been encased in concrete and the hair had been shaven off. On the rocky, windy Mora shore, the Blue Sea is a 4-story white stucco condominium complex. On the other side, the views of the yacht marina and the rocky shoreline are stunning. It's an area that someone of wealth and status would like to live. Someone like Joji Obara. Putting 2 and 2 together yet? This is the condominium where the management had heard those strange sounds from that tenant in July of 2000. And that tenant was Joji Obara. It took less than 60 seconds to walk from the front of that condominium complex to the site where Lucie and her remains were discovered. When the post-mortem investigators sliced through the cement encasing the head to search for teeth to compare dental records, they saw a distinct trait right away: a long, naturally blonde hair. Dental records just confirmed what everybody already knew. They'd found Lucie. In September of 2006, a colleague of Obara gave Tim Blackman, Lucie's father, something as referred to as condolence money in the amount of roughly $850,000 US. The money was distributed between the Lucie Blackman Trust and the Family for Future Use, according to Blackman. Jane Steer, Lucie's mother, who had previously declined a similar gift, referred to this as blood money, and that her ex-husband's acceptance of this money was an unbelievable betrayal. Mrs. Steer, she'd also alleged that her ex-husband had made a deal with the devil, being that the trial's defense, to get money, and signed a paper disputing critical evidence. On a website supposedly managed by the persons connected with the Obara defense team, details of the documentation were exposed. Another reason why she was so upset is that the present offered by people who admit their guilt to victims' families may be taken into account by courts while sentencing under Japanese law. Accepting this money might be interpreted as an acceptance of apologies and to some extent forgiveness. with the goal of reducing the element of retribution in sentences. Yikes. However, because O'Bara refused to admit his guilt, thankfully, it didn't apply to this case. Mr. Blackman's reportedly signed paperwork for O'Bara's attorney was also sent to the Japanese police criticizing O'Bara. He wrote, "I feel that the defendant is guilty on all charges, and in no way, shape, or form do I forgive the defendant. His friend's condolences are accepted, just as we've gotten condolences from all around the world." O'Bara was accused of drugging, sexually assaulting, and murdering Blackman, as well as the sexual assault of 6 other young women and the manslaughter of another hostess. He allegedly prepared Blackman a drug-laced drink before sexually assaulting her at a condominium in Zushi, Kanagawa Prefecture. O'Bara was sentenced to life in prison on various sexual assaults and Kurita Ridgway's murder on April 24th, 2007. However, he was cleared of the sexual assault and all wrongdoings, including the murder of Blackman. Now, before you start accusing Tim Blackman's decision to accept that condolence money like I did, the prosecutor made it very clear that the homicide conviction for Lucie that they were unable to get was because they couldn't provide any forensic evidence that tied Lucie Blackman's death to O'Bara, including the cause of death due to the decayed state of Lucie Blackman's body. There was a special notation in the court documents that stated that the court did not consider the payment of consolation money to the number of his victims when deciding that on his punishment. The Japanese justice system has been chastised for how they handled this case because Lucie was working illegally in a business where women frequently take off without warning. People suspected that the police just didn't take it seriously and just didn't even pursue any leads on this case. As a result, it took too long to ascertain the cause of death, and her body was discovered. The lack of forensic evidence was mentioned as grounds for an acquittal by 3 judges. And also, since Japan doesn't have a jury system, hopes of swaying a jury with circumstantial evidence was impossible. That was out the window. Old Joji, he did get at least 30 years, though, which is what a life sentence is in Japan. I guess it's okay. I mean, you guys know what I'm in favor of. Load them up. Well, that was the case of Lucie Blackman. This one was not publicized in America whatsoever. I'd never even heard of it. I actually came across it on a now defunct Tumblr account of all places. It's insane, though, how this seedy underbelly of society is so profitable, yet so looked down upon. I mean, if you watch anything on hostess clubs, they look like places girls can go and giggle and have a few drinks and get paid hella money. You know, I mean, it seems that way. But now, after researching this case, I'm convinced that what I thought were hostess clubs are not what they actually are. There may be some that are harmless, maybe, but they're what they seem to be. They're modern day harems and brothels operating under the ruse of fantasy. But I mean, like, on a different note, what do you expect on an industry that preys on people by selling them a false reality that results in them getting home alone, dreaming of this relationship that only exists when money is exchanged? I mean, that's an exact formula for tragedy in a Western world, at least. For once, Japan, catch up. You're killing women in this line of thinking. Rest in peace, sweet Lucie. That's it from this case on Homicidal Tea, and I'll see you real soon in the next video. Until then, especially during the holidays, try not to kill anybody. And I mean, if you want to, then just come binge a bunch of my videos. Oh, and like them too. Merry Christmas, everybody. I'll see you later. Bye.